You won't believe today's mysterious story. Imagine that the closest person to you is trying to kill you. How could that be real? But before we get into that story, if you like mysterious and exciting stories, please consider subscribing to our channel, Story Viewer. Turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our daily uploads. Let's explore the events together. So the story is about David. David has sickle cell anemia for a long time. He had visited the hospital many times, but he always found a way to come back home. This time, however, things took a turn for the worse. He fell into a coma. David's loved ones were starting to lose hope as they watched him lay there unconscious on the hospital bed. The medications he used diligently were supposed to have prevented his condition from deteriorating this terribly or this fast. Initially, David was simply placed in a ward for monitoring, and family and friends were allowed to visit whenever they wanted. When things began deteriorating, it began with David getting tired, but everyone eventually dismissed his symptoms and said to him that he just needed to get some more sleep. But then, his sleeping schedule began getting longer and more frequent. The family began also noticing certain things over the course of his daily life, and they really began getting worried. One day, David was alright, his frequent tiredness being the only indication that there was maybe something wrong. The next, he began showing signs of troubled speech, where his words were starting to slur. Things would only get worse from there until he would be transferred to the intensive care unit of the hospital. The days in the ICU were the worst for David's family, and all they could do was watch him lay there in a coma and pray for a quick recovery. This went on for weeks and weeks. The doctors assured the family that they were doing everything in their power to take care of David. And after a few excruciating weeks of waiting and waiting, David's family finally got to hear some good news. David was in a much stable condition now, as his body was starting to recover. But the doctors discovered something during their investigation of what was wrong that led them to believe that his wife was somehow involved in his coma. David's grandchildren were affected the most by his current state. They were the closest family members to David except for his wife, and they loved spending time with their grandfather. Victoria, David's wife, couldn't believe the news. David, her husband, was in a coma after taking the medications she had bought for him. Victoria was convinced that David was poisoned, but who could have had done such a thing? David was loved by everyone, and he had no enemies. Victoria had to figure out what happened, and fast. Victoria realized that the pharmaceutical company that produced the medication might have been the culprit. She ran to the doctor to share her thoughts, and he was impressed with her theory. The doctors were able to start making actual progress with David's treatment, but there was one piece of bad news. Victoria was responsible for what was happening to her husband. The lab reports showed that the medication contained toxic chemicals that had been banned from use by the FDA for over 50 years. The medications were not only expired, but they were also highly dangerous. Victoria had no choice, so she got a lawyer and started preparing for a court case. She suspected that David had been poisoned by the pharmaceutical company, and the lab reports confirmed it. On analyzing the medications, the doctors were able to see why David's condition had deteriorated so quickly. The operation to revive David was successful. Everyone was happy to see him alive and well again. However, Victoria felt guilty. She had been the one who purchased the meds and gave them to David each day. She knew that she wasn't responsible for putting him in a coma, but she still felt like an accomplice. The police eventually arrived, and Victoria was a witness in what was now a big case. She had single-handedly blown the lid on an operation that had probably caused the death of hundreds, if not thousands, of citizens. The officers were able to get hold of the first suspect, the store owner of the pharmacy from which Victoria had bought the medications. On further interrogation, it was found that the owner was involved with a larger crime organization involved in the sale of fake and expired drugs for profit. Victoria was considered a hero for her role in uncovering the secretive organization, and she was no longer found a suspect. David was on the road to recovery, and Victoria was relieved that justice was being served. Well, let us know what you think about this story in the comments down below, and as always, thank you for watching.